Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande.
Elsewhere, and not exactly at the same time.
Ione Sala, 6th Circle Oracle of Nethys and still but a 2nd Circle Wizard, does now walk the plains once more, again in company, not quite the same company she had last time. She sends a thought through a telepathic bond, one that can slip through a Sever-modified mind blank spell, made to be permeable to only divinations that Carissa Sever has cast. It is still an 8th Circle spell, and not one that could be revealed to any outside 8th Circle wizard, so it is cast each time via wish by an increasingly shocked Afridi who did not realize quite what service she was agreeing to in Galarian. "What is it with you ships and fire she sends?"
Feyanar has of course never in his life encountered a ship before, much the less a ship on fire, much the less caused problems thereby. He doesn't bother pointing this out. Nefreti Klepati is just like that too. She has enough of a handle on it, on what is real here and what is real somewhere else Nethys can see, that she's only annoying on purpose. But Ione doesn't even have that much of a handle, and might well be annoying by accident. "Just throw some diamonds at them and let's go find a new ship," he sends back.
While keeping firmly in mind, this time, that we are in the elemental plane of fire, and if you encounter a ship that is already on fire, it is probably supposed to be on fire, and you should not try to put it out. In Ione's defense, Nefreti only warned her to make sure that Feyanar did not set any ships on fire, without making it clear to Ione that there was a generalizable issue there.
"All right, but if somehow that works out horrendously, it's entirely your fault."
Ione will pay over a small amount of platinum to pay for the damage caused, no diamonds being required here. Feyanar does not seem to have a strong grasp of concepts like negotiating the price downward, even if you currently have more money than that, rather than appearing conspicuous by throwing money at a problem until it goes away.
Then they'll go on looking through the city of brass.
Fomok Medina. Some people don't speak Ignan, but everyone Fianna's been interacting with recently has tongues, and so no excuse. And even if you were to insist on translating it, City of Brass is a horrendous one, and the popular supposed close translation, Devouring City, hardly better. It's Fomok with an U, not an U.
Fomok Medina, Ione, for anything resembling a planar ship that could sail the maelstrom, keeping an eye out for quintuple wish sequence sellers along the way.
Their path crosses the form of what appears to be an old woman in white, wearing something like a blindfold made of old and rusted metal, leaning against a brass post of a great brass building. As the two planar travellers pass her, she lifts her head, and if not for the rusted blindfold, her gaze would point at Feyanar. "You will not find in this city what you are seeking here," says she in Ignan.
"What?" Feyanar says automatically. "Anything I think of seeking?"
Possibly a slight trace of a smile flickers on the old woman's lips. "I spoke of what you are seeking, not of what you have sought or will seek."
"Right," says Feyanar, slightly disappointed as this implies much less power to manipulate the markets of the City of Brass. "Who are you and why should we care what you say?"
"To you, I will seem at first like a strange entity who knows too much. Your business is secret, and you will wonder if I know even more. I will say that I know you mean to buy 30 wishes, and you'll think that I could have guessed this by tracing the paths of the 6 travellers who came to this city before. I will say that I know you are looking for a ship that can sail the maelstrom, and you will think that anyone who was spying on your current trip could have learned this. It will still concern you, and so you will care what I say."
"Well then say it, we're in a hurry."
"You're looking for a ship that can sail beyond the maelstrom into the primordial chaos that lies outside creation, and you are not seeking to do this only from curiosity or an exploratory spirit or from chafing under Pharasma's restrictions. You fear that Pharasma's creation might end, for reasons ultimately springing from that same anomaly which enabled you to obtain so many diamonds, and you are trying to live on, to ensure that something born of creation survives."
All right, he's paying attention. But he's annoyed about it.
Ione is a lot more concerned than that. Terrified, even. Nefreti didn't warn her about this, and Ione does know by this point, in a general sort of way, that things have gone off track from what was supposed to have happened. And Feyanar has less bluff than Zero somehow, and is now visibly paying attention in order to clearly inform this entity that its guess was correct. About a piece of information that Nethys and his allies have spent some really incredibly extraordinary efforts to keep confined only to beings who won't or can't use that information. Outwardly, Ione will not look terrified or annoyed or bone-horrified about any of these things respectively, because Ione has more bluff than zero.
In honesty, I know more. All of that is only what I could and would have guessed, even if I knew no more. It is only what I would have predicted and foretold in any case, through my having considered in advance how creation might end, or how others might seek to escape its ending, and having always kept a watch on the city of brass, with certain agents, to notice when someone seems like they might be buying too many wishes in those plainer markets that sell those, to set watch upon those purveyors that someone might wrongly imagine could sell an ark in which to flee a dying creation. If I had to make the reasoning sound reasonable in mortal terms, I might tell that story.
You deal with it, Feanar says through the telepathic bond to Ione. I have already expended all my tolerance for Nethisians.
I'll try, but I think it's focused on you, and I'm sure it's not a Nethesian. What more do you know? Ione asks it.
The old woman goes on addressing Feanar. Even if you could find here a vessel to sail the maelstrom, it would disintegrate within hours once exposed to the blind eternities beyond. To truly escape Pharasma's grasp is more difficult than you realize. I tried in my own time. To forge an ark like that is a millennium's work for a god, and even then, to endure beyond creation it must be protected by somewhat of those energies that underlie creation itself. If I did not know more, I would say to you that I did not think you had all the resources required to it, but that I considered it worth my time to inquire. If I did not know more, I would say to you that even if I concluded that you stood a chance, the price of my own knowledge and aid was not only my own place among the refugees, but that I and my husband would take with our chosen people, and we would also lead in that expedition. So I would demand, for there are greater resources required to this work than diamonds. In fact, I do know more, but I must play out how things would have gone otherwise.
Right, says Feanar, with genuine irritation now. Then I'd say that I don't believe you and you're wasting my time, and that I don't care at all what the gods say is impossible, because the word of the gods isn't worth the paper it isn't written on, and that you can come along if you're useful but you're not in charge of a damn thing, because I'm not going to all this trouble just to obey some new, equally tedious god.
And I would smile a little then, but briefly, before I told you that I knew where to find the ark you will not find in this city. You being already from Golarion, I would not need to explain the Starstone to you. I would ask instead if you had the strength to pass the lesser of the Starstone's 2 tests and reach the Starstone in its cathedral, as have many previous souls who touched it and were never seen again. But those are the less impossible requisites. The energy that sustains creation can be found in Pharasma, in Pharasma's spire, above all in the seal at the base of the spire, and in very few other places. I'd inquire of you where you meant to lay your hands on it.
I can't fathom why I'd answer any of those questions, or for that matter, why you'd ask them.
And I'd reply that I was, possibly, interested in having you join with me to escape creation, or less probably that I might join with you, though that would require you to have greater resource than I expected, but that I was interested in fairly weighing the measure of our contributions, with neither of us seeking to dominate the other by force. If you can escape creation entirely without my aid, then I and my husband are but 2 would-be passengers upon your vessel, prepared to pay any fair price you ask and submit to any lawful governance, and we know others interested as well.
Right, well, you'd have said that if you thought something you don't think, and that's about as much as I want to talk about things you don't think.
I wouldn't be saying all that if there wasn't a reason. My time is valuable to me, as yours is to you, but I'll offer price for trying to answer as you would have answered, even as my less knowing self would also soon have offered you payment to continue conversing. The old woman reaches into her shawl coat, slowly, unthreateningly, and takes out what looks like a bar of metal, coated lightly in glass by some means. 2 pounds of spell silver still holds some value, even in Golarion. I offer this as payment to continue this conversation, as my other possible self would have done the same.
He holds out his hand to take it. Well, I suppose having noticed one might want to escape creation, and also that while it'd be hard to survive outside it, it probably isn't impossible, puts you a cut ahead of most people I'd hire. But I'm not joining any projects run by mysterious strangers who think that instead of Pharasma, we should have them.
As much as I wished to leave creation, the old woman answers, I would not have cared to take my chances on a vessel all of mortals without any divinity to aid them. Gods are like ship caulkers and Wainwrights to an undertaking like that. But not all gods are so noxious, or so it seems to myself. If Desna or Abadar had been the keystone of creation, then I would not seek so much to leave it.
I don't have any grievances with Abadar, or rather the ones I have are all very personal and specific. Desna can be helpful if she wants, but wouldn't, I think, announce that she were actually in charge, and if she did, then that's not being helpful and she can leave.
For a long time we will be a tiny ship of order in a sea of chaos, and most islands we happen across will not be friendly nor trustworthy. It's not as bad as mortals are led to think, from interacting with only the spawn of the far tapestry, that Pharasma doesn't trouble herself to keep out. For those alien things that'd speak to us in plain numbers and trade us knowledge have not been permitted entry to creation. But it will still be long before anyone has an option of leaving our vessel without their soul immediately dissolving, and where disagreement cannot be resolved by exit, it must be resolved some other way. Someone or something must be in charge. Had you meant not to appoint yourself, and also not appoint any other, my estimated chance of your success would plummet sharply.
Of course I'll be in charge.
None of the powers I know that might otherwise take an interest in buying passage or aiding your journey will submit themselves unconditionally to a mortal captain. Mortals are simply too changeable from a power's perspective. Abadar, if he led, would be a known quantity. He would not change from the goals and methods he had already demonstrated. Even from the perspective of those powers that were once mortals themselves, it is just not possible to know a mortal well enough to trust them wholly. Whatever you have seen of their past, mortals can change. Did I and my husband lead such an expedition, we would not ask any allied powers to submit themselves to us unconditionally. There would be a contract to which powers were signatory. Have you composed such a contract of passage?
Perhaps you should go make your own ship then, for all your powers. For I'm not wasting my time in the doing of favours for beings that cannot regard mortals as worth bargaining with. And if I have agreements, they are for people whose company I might desire.
I am here and bargaining with you, am I not? And my husband has never held himself too good to bargain with mortals, and has treated with courtesy all those who sought him with that intention, whether they were weaker than himself or mightier. Nor have I asked you for any favour I haven't offered to pay for, and my husband shares that spirit.
Then I might write you a contract of passage, and you can see what you make of it.
Perhaps. I'd worry that as you stand now, it might not be a contract I could swallow. I'd think that perhaps you'd value my possible contributions more dearly once you failed to find any great ship for sale here that could sail even the lesser maelstrom, or after you'd verified how the maelstrom grows more corrosive as you steer towards the edges of creation. But there is one cautionary omen that must be given you immediately, if you mean to undertake this quest and be its hero. Buy only 25 wishes this day, not 30. Do not augment your wisdom.
Hard no, Ione says out loud. She's increasingly worried about where exactly this thing is trying to steer Feanar, and though she has nothing terribly clever to say, she wants to check what happens if its attention is directed more toward herself. Nefreti Klepati specifically warned me to make sure he didn't somehow end up with augmented intelligence, but no wisdom, no matter what kind of tricks fate seemed to be throwing about that. Nefreti Klepati is a 9th circle of Nethys, and she knows things that gods don't.
Nefreti Klepati has only one trick, and she uses it for everything. If something is happening that's unparalleled in her visions, she's as blind as an ordinary god after prophecy's been shattered. You should aspire to better, young oracle, and not rely so heavily on your master's guidance.
I think I have enough wisdom to be getting on with, Fianna says cheerfully enough.
Oh, hell no, Ione says into their telepathic bond, still taking pleasure every time she uses the word as the curse that it should be. Feanar, Don't you think it's alarming that the incredibly suspicious entity is requesting you not to augment the one stat Nefredi said to make sure got augmented, and that stat is the trickery resistance and awful mistake avoidance stat? And Fionar is weirdly willing to go along with that. Fionar, why? Ione doesn't even know why she should be panicking, but she clearly should be.
It's absolutely suspicious, he says cheerfully back to her. Quite possibly we shouldn't do it. But it wouldn't surprise me very much to learn that this careful game you all are balancing in fact falls apart if I see through it, in which case I definitely want to do that, but can believe that this minute isn't the most convenient possible time.
When these telepathic transmissions have ceased, and only then the old woman speaks again. Wisdom is also closeness to divinity, and distance from divinity can also be a resource. You will need all you have of that resource when the time comes to spend it.
See, he says, I really like that explanation, which is why I don't trust it at all.
And now Ione is trying to figure out the chance that the old woman, who's presumably a divinity or a herald or something, is able to snoop on their telepathic connection, maybe even their actual thoughts, or if she's just reading past Feanar's not-so-great bluff. Savard did warn them that the selectively permeable mind blank might not ultimately be as solid as the original complete mind blank. It's mainly meant to resist standardized discern location from a distance, not divinities staring at it up close.
Fianna isn't even considering whether she's able to snoop. Obviously she is. There are a lot of beings that can do this kind of thing. Ione's one of them, and it's always exactly this annoying. He appreciates that in this case, Ione's getting a taste of her own medicine.
Indeed. But it is not in my interest to tell you all of my knowledge that you could benefit from, while you still seem little to esteem my aid. I do have my pride as you have yours. I don't say that you could never sail beyond creation unassisted, given time enough to build your own vessel and somehow lay hands upon the energies of creation. But you are not conducting yourself like a person who has no time limit on his endeavour. You are here hoping to buy a planar ship already made, instead of building one special to its purpose. You mean to flee creation, and you need to do it soon. That you cannot do without allies, any more than I myself could do it alone.
If you want to deliver a lecture on how to flee creation, I promise to act appropriately overawed at your genius so your pride can be assuaged. It must be difficult being prideful and unable to assuage your pride merely by actually achieving things.
I've no use for your or anyone else's fawning. I've heard far more than enough such from those who mistakenly think I care to hear it. But to have one's contribution undervalued is a troubling thing, for it implies a corresponding lack of repayment, and the same if the payer seems too much to overesteem the coin in which I am being paid. Mouthing words of praise is easy. I want something harder. I want the respect you give your shoes.
If you have something valuable to me, I'll pay you for it and respect you for it. If you have something of great value to me, I'll pay you well for it. If you don't, then I won't.
I'm not something merely of great value. I'm something that is necessary for your long journey. I do not realistically think that you could find another pair of shoes like myself.
He shrugs. So?
There are things you discard the first time they seem troublesome to you. A merchant with valuable goods, but who does not seem to treat you respectfully enough for your taste, or who asks you for pay in an unfamiliar coin. There are things you cannot discard, like your shoes upon a long journey. If your shoes could speak, it would be well to make compact with them before you set out.
Look, Fee Anar says, I spend a lot of time around mysterious, powerful people who are omniscient, or are uncannily perfect at guessing exactly what to say to you, or are arguably gods, or some combination of those. They're lovely people sometimes. There are some of them I wouldn't strangle even if I could. But one picks up some habits when there are all kinds of powerful things that know too much around speaking vague prophecy, instead of handing you a contract they want you to sign. And the main thing you learn is that you can actually just not let them do that and spitefully die in a fire instead. Maybe that's what you'd call the thing you spend when you get wiser, where you replace that simple and eminently workable rule with whatever gods do among each other. Maybe it's something you have no comprehension of. I don't know. I don't care. I have said I'll pay you. I meant it. If I give my word, I'll keep it. But I will happily die in a fire rather than acknowledge some vague, unbounded obligation to excessively powerful things that want to push me around. If I can only have my trip conditional on knuckling under to such beings, That trip is of no value to me. There are no gains from trade to peaceably split. I would, in fact, take off my shoes, walking across the world wound, if my shoes started telling me what to do. Because I just don't care that much about dying, and I do care a lot about not being easy to manipulate. If you want to make a deal, offer one. If your deal sounds worse than dying in a fire, and many things sound worse than dying in a fire when they're offered by smug entities that know too much, then I'll die in a fire instead. If your advice is to make a compact, tell me what you're offering and what you want to be paid for so that we can write the God's-damned contract.
The old woman nods. As you now speak more plainly to me, I'll speak more plainly to you. I was a farrier's daughter before I was a mysterious, powerful anything, and I'm afraid to simply appoint you captain of the voyage and obey you because you strike me as in some ways incautious. You offered insult to the mysterious, powerful thing, saying, "It must be difficult being prideful and unable to assuage your pride merely by actually achieving things." That's the sort of rashness that a farrier's daughter watches men die for. I also know more than that, but it's knowledge that I received under contract and that I don't want to use because that imposes additional terms on me unless I could have succeeded otherwise. I'm telling you that because it's something you disclose to somebody with whom you want to build a firm relationship, the sort where you aren't simply wearing your magic items hidden to manipulate them, the sort where you worry they'd resent the hiding afterward if they learned. I am being more cautious around you than you are being cautious around myself, and on the proposed voyage we would have to be cautious around things from the far tapestry.
The task we've set ourselves isn't one cautious people set themselves, but if you have advice on not being manipulated by beings from the far tapestry, then that is among the advice I'd pay you for and follow, if it was any good.
My husband is wealthy enough that mortal coin means nothing to me. The pay I seek is a healthy working relationship, in which we either have terms of alliance, or I don't expect to die if I submit to all your orders. But I can give you 2 pieces of advice like that, to be repaid in the coin of real respect, or even a down payment toward compromise. I won't set the price in advance, only ask you to be fair once you've determined the goods worth.
I'm listening.
First, this. To the things from the far tapestry, you are a sort of mechanical contrivance whose levers they are prodding, looking for triggers. To bind them on a level where their words bear any relation to reality, rather than being pure manipulations, is only the first step with trading with them. After that, they will be looking for truths that fix reality, true things they can say that move you. And they have more freedom in it than you imagine, because what they say affects what is true. It bears some resemblance to the art of self-fulfilling prophecy, which the young oracle beside you has barely begun to explore. From the perspective of the far tapestry, anything resembling a swift emotional reaction is an alien, to them, shortcut through your mind's pathways, which they will try to exploit towards self-fulfillment. Had I wished to ruin you, using the arts that they would use, I would have, without warning and with a carefully established previous frame of insufficiently concealed contempt, prophesied to you that your pride would be your flaw and your downfall, that you would hold yourself too great to heed the counsel of wise elder beings like myself that could have saved you. I am not using the exact words I'd have used if I were trying that myself. But with the right choice of wordings, intonations, contexts, I could have spoken those words and thereby made them true. I could tell you that your reluctance to compromise would destroy you in a way that made it sound like I was sincerely contemptuous about the fact, but maybe also didn't know as much about you as I thought, and you'd think, "Ha, I'll show her then," and refuse to compromise and so seal the truth I'd predicted. Dealing with creatures like that is in fact unpleasant, and I would recommend leaving such negotiations to my husband.
I do realize that, and I'm not so easily played, but I'm happy to leave it to your husband. Had I any reason to think I could trust him or you?
You're less easily played when you're in a mood to carefully reflect on things, perhaps. I can already predict about you that you are not always in a mood like that, and see some of how I'd steer you to not be in that mood at the key moment when you heard my words. To be a kind of thing that has changeable, responsive moods makes you, from their perspective, a strangely vulnerable sort of thought process. They can consider how to attack every kind of mood you can be prodded to enter, rather than you being in one constant mental state with a more limited set of self-fulfilling claims.
Sure. And thank you, I guess, for not doing that. If you're in fact not doing that, and if that's what you're fishing for. I notice we're not talking about why I should trust you.
We cannot yet form the bonds of trust as trust should be, until you know more about me than it's to my own advantage to reveal now. And you will become smarter than this, and later wiser. If you came to trust me too quickly now, you would notice then. That would be an ill start to the voyage.
Well then, I'm not sure we have much more to say to one another.
You know more about me than at the start of this conversation, and I know more about you that I'm allowed to take into account. That the process does not complete immediately does not mean there has been no progress. But I'll move on then to my second advice, which is more of a tangible offer. I would guess that Nefreti Klepati has seen you in alternate possibilities and has seen some of your possible fates. Learning of those might enable you to break free of them rather than others using them to move you about. I will give this oracle girl a private message to bear to Klepati, though it cannot yet come to your own ears, by which I mean to motivate Klepati to tell you what she has withheld. That is my next offering to you in this relationship.
Well, I won't turn that down.
The old woman turns then her head toward Ione and speaks apparently in plain Taldane, though it is also evident that Feyanar does not hear. Brace yourself and show no reaction to my words.
Oh, that's not a good sign. I'm braced.
You made an error in opposing my interests here, in seeking to warn that man against me. It's not to my interest to let creation be threatened if I don't think I have a chance to escape creation. Having learned this much in this way, if I failed to come to alliance terms with this man, I would eliminate the threat to creation after I'd investigated it. There would be no constraints on how I used that knowledge, which I'd have learned regardless.
Ione Sala shows no outward reaction. Her heart is hammering inside her, though, for she's finally thinking, and yes, that should have occurred to her. And even more, it's occurring to her that Feyanar himself would be ecstatic if this being did exactly that. Understood, Ione says.
I'd know from having seen him for only 2 minutes that his pride is his fatal flaw. He is not ready to lead a voyage out of creation. He is not ready to hear how unready he is. There is something in the nature of creation, or perhaps what lies beyond it, that makes mortals to matter in it at all, as we wouldn't otherwise expect to be true. For that reason, I consider it a running concern that perhaps a voyage like this one can only succeed if it's a mortal to begin it and drive it, a mortal who hasn't been turned into a full hand puppet of gods along the way. But he is unequal at present, even to the simpler requisite of coming to reasonable terms with me about my aid. He wants to be sole captain of the voyage and rule it alone, and it is possible to put him into a mood where he does not want to hear from his advisers. I would not at present want to go with him, as he is. So Nethis's gamble ends here and poorly, unless Nefreti Klepati tells this man everything pertinent she knows about his fates and his dooms, and that enables him to grow beyond those.
Understood.
My price for my aid to Nethys in this matter is that Nefreti Klepati tells me anything she's glimpsed in other possibilities about a power that can control space or make portals of a vast scale. Any such tale, however distant from us, might give me a hint about where to look for a power like that somewhere in creation. Success there would also make this a more promising voyage. And you need me to decide in the end that I'll gamble on this being the right moment to go into a greater exile.
I'll convey that, though I can't speak for my master. How is Nefreti to contact you?
She knows me, so will you, as soon as I decide the matter is no longer a secret from you. And that's also a helpful act toward him, for it's better that people begin by seeing me as I am, for good or ill, and only afterward consider the distorted stories of me. The old woman turns back to Feyanar, speaking this time again to be heard by both. I will be waiting here in fire where you found me, if you later become more desiring of my aid. I'd offer to send some small minion with you for your convenience, but I don't expect you want that.
Doesn't really sound convenient, no. I'll think about what you had to say, though rather little of it was about how concretely to do a project like this one.
If you could somehow lay your hands upon the energies that sustain creation, the mathematics of them have been the study of an ancient silver dragon who dwells in Kenebres. I'd help you more if I could, but while I yet dwell within creation, I am constrained by far too many oaths and pacts and treaties and considerations.
He nods because all the things he can think of to say are sarcastic, and that's just bad incentives when she's actually being mildly helpful.
Outward sarcasm would mean nothing to her. Only the underlying realities of his attitude matter. But that he cares at all what she thinks and restrains his pride in any way is progress. I say also, in case it should matter to you, that I have not truly been here in person, though this form does resemble me, and I have been speaking through it quite directly. Approaching you in my true person without asking your permission about it would not have been courteous.
He figured. Gods tend to be notable to be around. I thank you for the courtesy, to whatever degree courtesy is, how your decision was motivated.
She smiles slightly and folds her hands into her lap. Though the metal blindfold is still on her, there is an air about her as if she'd closed her eyes.
Cheliax, at a point in time later than it was before the text earlier said earlier. The developing situation in Cheliax is complicated and of course fraught, and it could hardly be otherwise. First, Abigail Thrune was assassinated along with Aspexia Rugaton inside her own palace, which is the sort of thing that happens from time to time. Then, Abigail Thrune was wish-napped out of hell, which happens less. Worst of all, the crown of infernal majesty was lost, and then 2 days later that crown was ransomed back from Keltham, now styling himself Keltham of Elsewhere. Foremost, the crown was exchanged for Cheliax, locating every last woman it could find from its secret Ilani breeding program, and giving those women a choice. On the one hand, a polymorph abortion before their children could be ensouled, or alternatively, going to Osirian to be made statues, possibly for quite a while until Keltham or his chosen delegate declared that creation had become a fitting place for Dathilani children, or else decided that the children must be aborted after all. In either case, those women would afterward be made very rich and free to go where they wished. And second most, in exchange of the crown's return, the Chelish state and Asmodeus's church were to make no further effort in person or by proxy to locate or retrieve Abigail Thrune. So now Cheliax can infer, given that Keltham seemed to know about the breeding program in the first place, Keltham almost certainly knows he has remaining children in Cheliax. Keltham knows he couldn't get them all. Keltham evidently cares about his prospective children a great deal. If you had higher intelligence and splendor than wisdom, you might conclude, after a deadline of probable ensoulment had passed, and Keltham had not destroyed Cheliax already, that this meant it was okay to invade Osirian now. You would not have wanted to look at any earlier point like you were about to invade Osirian. Keltham might not have liked that, and you wouldn't have had those definitely not hostages yet. So you would not be ready to invade immediately after the deadline passed because you couldn't visibly prepare before that. But once that deadline had passed, you would start carrying out Cheliax's previous plan to then begin readying its forces to invade Osirian. So the first complication of the present situation, then, is that Cheliax is now visibly gathering its forces for war. Obviously, Cheliax hasn't officially made any announcement that Osirion is the target. That part is not spoken outside of the most tightly secured chambers, lest any spy should hear it and make official report. But that's only so spying empires can potentially pretend not to know and choose not to take official notice. Everyone knows that if Cheliax is invading anyone, it's almost certainly the home of the scientific revolution. The next element of complication is who now sits upon the throne of Cheliax. Imaginably, one could try to hold the throne open against Abigail Thrune's return, but then far too many people would try to seize it. Cheliax must have a single clear ruler at all times, but especially if war is about to begin. When Abigail guessed that Calantra Thrune would most likely be next to rule the Chelish Imperium, she made that guess based on mistaken premises having to do with time travel. Calantra Thrune is sensible, cautious, older than Abigail was when Abigail assumed the throne. Given the apparent circumstances, Calantra has opted to back the throne bid of a cousin instead. Abigail is not abandoned by the church to hell. She is ransomed away from Cheliax's rescue. For all anyone knows, Keltham could decide to send Abigail Thrune back the next day. If Abigail II is really gone for good, Calantra suspects her cousin's reign may not last all that long anyways. Most Chelish reigns don't. There are things you ought not to do if you are determined to keep your head attached to your shoulders for very long, and one of those things is seating yourself upon the throne of Cheliax, in the throne room that was Abigail's, while Abigail Thrune still exists in any form that might take offense. Chelish throne room, Irwain. Then the new infernal magistrix, now styling herself Terthul II, though that wasn't her birth name, is no coward whatever else you might say of her. Her new position is, of course, fragile. All the more so because Turtle too must avoid letting her reign appear fragile at almost any cost, including that she must avoid the appearance of being concerned about the appearance of fragility. Turthul II has conducted no systematic sweep of Abigail II's loyalists because a number of former Abigail loyalists are too valuable to be easily disposed of. Abigail II's visible fondness for somebody tends to have been unfortunately correlated with their competence. For that matter, an even-handed tally of the pro-Abigail faction would have to include, for example, Aspexia Rugaton, who, while on constantly fractious terms with Abigail II, did dislike her less than previous monarchs. If you sweep the Abigail loyalists but leave visible holes in the sweep corresponding to people you don't dare kill, that makes you look weak. Turthul II, then, has not conducted a sweep of only the weaker Abigail loyalists, given that she cannot sweep them all. The appearance of indifference to them can also serve, but there are many unimportant personnel responsible for maintaining the Majestrix's personal quarters, mostly repaired after the attack by some greater Ilani weapon, and it was easy enough for Turthul to make their palace service more difficult and demanding, after which it is only natural that Turthul sent off to torture or took a few moments to personally punish those personal servants of the Queen who failed in their work. Among those already excruciated to death are several souls whom Abigail II was said to favor among her personal household. It serves to perform that Abigail II is never coming back. This does have the effect of making a lot of other competent people, whom Abigail II might have arguably visibly favored in some way, a little nervous about Turthul II. Really, the fact that Turthul II isn't purging tons of competent people is something to be said in her favor as a Chelish monarch, even if she's refraining from it during an incredibly tense situation on the verge of war. But it's the sort of internal peace that could change on less than a round's notice. Another stranger source of complications in Cheliax is that somebody has been casting permanent symbols of healing within Asmodean temples, starting with those at the World Wound, and then in the primary temples serving major Chelish cities. This mysterious benefactor of Cheliax has left no calling card, set off no alarms that anyone remembers, and demanded no payment. This is a rather significant act, one that in some ways shifts balances of power.
Really? In that case, one wishes to know why it wasn't done earlier.
Golarion Iorwane. All right then, some background. The inability of evil clerics to channel positive energy for wide-radius healing is one of the key disadvantages of evil, especially when it comes to large military operations, or the economic productivity of whole countries, especially evil countries that don't conduct themselves in a way where they could just hire clerics of Abadar or Pharasma to channel healing. If you look in an academic magical textbook for beginning practitioners, it will tell you that symbol of healing is a third circle divine spell, and that, like most symbols, it is among the rare spells with a doubly stabilizable topology that can be made permanent. If you look up a standard list of known spells that permanency can perpetuate, you'll see the entry for symbol of healing lists the caster strength of permanency required as late 5th circle, and a weight of diamond dust that in current markets costs around 10,000 chloropy. The actual weight is greater than the weight of a wish diamond, but a wish diamond requires a single large diamond, and that's much harder to find than an equivalent weight of diamond matter of any size for a permanency. So, given that this trick works at all, why don't large evil cities already have their own permanency symbols of healing then?
That is a good question. First, of course, one checks the basic economic logic to make sure the business plan would consistency check. How much could a symbol of healing earn in an evil city? How long would it take to earn back the 10,000 GP price?
The sticker price on a first circle priest casting Cure Light Wounds is 10 GP, or so you'll usually be told. Naively, you might think that a symbol of healing bestows an effect at least that powerful. So by using it on 3 subjects per day, you could earn back the permanency price within a year, 3 people day, 10 GPs, 365 days, 10,150 jury. The first issue with this business plan is that 10 GP is only the price if you are a foreign merchant or an adventurer, or you look visibly rich. If you're an ordinary townsman of the faith, Cure Light Wounds runs more like 1 GP. The second issue is that channeled healing in towns that aren't too purely evil to offer it doesn't sell at the same price as Cure. It's not that channeled healing is significantly weaker, but that it's used by more than one person at a time, which means that it runs on a schedule which makes it less convenient and particularly less medically convenient. The price of Cure Light Wounds is driven by the value of having a cure cast on you right now. The product market fit of channeled healing is for injuries that aren't urgently life-threatening: burns, deep cuts, broken bones. It's the want of that cheap lesser healing that has the citizens of Ostenso going about with visible scars or poorly healed bone breaks, but mostly still alive. In most cities with channeled healing, it ends up costing somewhere around 1 silver piece.
Then, for any evil population center large enough that there's 300 people per day who need minor healing, a symbol would pay for itself in 1 year. Does Ostenso qualify?
Yes.
So why doesn't Ostenso already have a healing symbol? If one's priors are already updated on light contact with Galarian, one would consider such non-economically driven answers as, because evil religions don't much prize innovation or economic sensibility, or because evil rulers don't consider it on theme for evil cities to offer cheap healing, and they're not the ones living with the consequences. Or the general loan interest rate in evil countries could be over 100%.
Adathilan is learning. For many temples to evil gods, that would be a sufficient answer, but Asmodeanism does laud cleverness, and souls pledged to Asmodeus must fear Hell's own vengeance if they violate a compact made in Hell's name. His temples can borrow at some of the lowest interest rates in Galarian, and if the church didn't think of it, the crown would.
All right, why are there so many people in Ostenso with visible scars from not-healed injuries?
The root of the answer is that Symbol of Healing is a divine spell, and Permanency is an arcane spell, and it must be the same hand that casts the spell and the permanency. Divine magic in general does not always mix easily with arcane magic, and divine healing especially is troublesome. That Razmir's priests can successfully heal their parishioners without visibly using infernal healing is unusual. If any wizard with early Sever-level spellcraft could create a ring of cure light wounds as readily as Sever made her tiny swords of glibness, also for a spell no arcanist could stabilize, what Razmiran's priesthood could do would not be exceptional enough to fool anyone. In fact, a lot of sensible, educated people in Razmiran shrug and accept that in real life, Razmir's priests probably just worship a god and get spells from him. Because why go to all that trouble and do something nearly impossible, namely using arcane magic to imitate divine healing just to put on a supposed lie that doesn't obviously benefit Razmir that much, compared to him just saying that he's a ninth circle wizard rather than a god? It's a lie that works because Razmir is mixing arcane magic and divine healing on a level that most ninth circle wizards can't. Which all sums to this. If you want to make a permanent symbol of healing, you would realistically want to be a mystic theurge who could channel a wastefully large amount of divine power to imitate a fifth circle arcane permanency, not just a random fifth circle wizard who got promoted by fiat of Asmodeus to clerichood and cast the symbol from scroll. You'd also need to spend years studying divine healing spells and their interactions with the arcane. Or, alternatively, have something like INT 26, and maybe also a tutor who understood the physics of magic on a level more commonly associated with gods. The complete list of known spellcasters like that is Nefreti Klepati, and Nefreti Klepati does not care to make permanent symbols of healing and sell them to evil churches.
Or rather, that was the complete list before. Pilar Pineda has mostly stayed out of contact with Cheliax after leaving Project Lawful, and she vanished from Scries entirely after Abigail Thrune's assassination. But it is known that Lady Pineda has become a mystic theurge. She displayed that much capability while rescuing a Chelish world-wound fortress from certain death under a choking demonic smoke.
Which brings us to the complicated part. Even if Abigail too had still occupied the throne, granting symbols of healing to only Asmodean temples would have been a politically fraught act. A loyal Chelish subject ought to also provide some symbols of healing laid upon banners to be carried about by Cheliax's military, and maybe put them up in some crown offices as well. One aspect of the current balance of Chelish power between church and crown is that all the serious healing is done at Asmodean temples, but most lesser healing is done by First Circle wizards casting an infernal healing, far more numerous in Cheliax than elsewhere. This balance has now been wholly upset, and not in a way where any crown offices got any permanent healing symbols of their own, even though they could just as easily have been granted to wizards or non-magical state offices. In the further context of Turthel Tutu's new reign, this behavior could be interpreted as Lady Pineda favored of Aspexia Rugaton, and believed to be on friendly terms with Abigail II, deliberately snubbing the new regime in favor of the Church of Asmodeus, which is the sort of appearance that every single other power in Cheliax, even Aspexia Rugaton, has been trying to avoid. Any appearance like that might set off internal conflict, with a war with Osirian on the horizon, that either the new queen or the Most High or both ought to be cross with you about having started. Or you could take the impending Osiran War as a fine time to push forward the church, since nobody wants to set off an internal conflict about your pushing. if you were sufficiently unworried about how the new queen would take it. Very few people would be that unworried.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.